Hello, this is Don Victor, author of Drawn to Win, host of the podcast Drawn to Win, the director of the Academy of Composition, and the creator of the Core 80 Experience, also known as the See and Grow Rich in Art video course, which you can find out more information at core80.com. This is the Drawn to Win podcast, where I have the incredible privilege to draw artists from around the world into fun and meaningful conversations around art and life, and yes, maybe even a little food. You can hear us each week on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. So make sure you subscribe so you always have a seat among friends. Let's get into the show. Dear Holy Spirit, we welcome you in this beautiful conversation. And as we, I don't know what we're going to seek today. We're going to seek something yellow. And so, Nicole, I welcome you into this space of exploration. And so,
thank you for having me, Mr. Don Victor.
Don Victor. The other day, I woke up very, very early.
How early is early in your world?
I
know how early that is.
Yeah.
So I saw you online.
Yeah. This morning.
Probably 3:30.
3 o'clock. Yeah. So about somewhere.
Oh
between
my gosh.
It's usually between 2 and 4. So if it's a good morning, it's 3:30. Sometimes I get up at 12:30, 1:30, and I'll, but then around 6, 7 in the morning, I need to go take an hour nap, and then I'm good for the rest of the day. But
fascinating.
Yeah, it's strange. By me doing this practice, I actually get more sleep, more consistent sleep than I probably my entire life. I've just never really been a sleeper.
Fascinating.
So I woke up one morning and did what most people do. Where's my phone? Where's my phone? Right? And I grabbed my phone to check my Facebook, and I saw your picture, and the contrast of your dark hair, at least in the picture was, against that yellow background, I found very intriguing, the shapes that were formed. So I clicked on it, and I was like, oh, wow, you're an artist. You're an artist person. And so we talked that morning and invited you on the show. And so now here you are.
Wonderful.
So what do you do? What kind of artwork do you do? How would you describe it?
Well, did you go to the website and do a little research on me?
But I'm asking you.
Damn. just kidding.
All right, let me ask you this question then, if you don't want to go there yet.
No,
okay, go.
I'll go anywhere within reason, of course.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Like, how would you describe the work that you make?
I was trained as a classical realist, so I'm still certainly in the realist camp, and that's how I call myself. I think a lot of words are bandied around about what to call ourselves, those of us in figuration. We're neither classical nor strictly realist, but I have that atelier background, which has been, taking off in the last 20 years or so.
What atelier did you participate in?
I first went to Studio Cecil Graves, which predated the Florence Academy of Art. And the two men who ran it, Charles Cecil, and Daniel Graves. And they went their separate ways, and Daniel created the Florence Academy of Art, and I followed him.
And do you know where Cecil went?
He remained
in
Florence. They both are in Florence, different sides of the Arno River.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So that means you studied then in Italy then?
I did. I'm an old time.
Shoot.
Yeah. Total unexpected turn in my life.
How did you get
best
there?
Kinds. By plane. No.
Oh my God, you're awesome. Okay.
How did I end up there?
Yeah.
By chance. by chance. And actually, it was one of those, you're going to make fun of me for the word seminal. Do not make fun of me. It's one of my favorite words. So I'm
This
going to use
is,
it again. Seminal experience
mhm,
walking into Studio Cecil Graves. I broke out into a cold sweat, and I
mm,
said, I need to be here because they were teaching what I longed to learn, which was how to draw, basically.
yeah.
And I hadn't been able to find that thus far in my life. And I convinced my parents to take pity on me and let me stay for 3 months. And they did take pity on me because they didn't know what the hell to do with me. And and I stayed. And in that kind of training, with the eagerness and a modicum of talent, which every kid in that room has,
Hmm.
I learned a heck of a lot. And so I proved myself. And before long, a lot of things happened. Um, I shan't touch upon unless it comes up more organically. Uh, I stayed for 5 years, and now fast
Okay.
forward to here.
So
And I
you went there
listened.
for 3 months and you stayed there for 5 years.
Correct.
Sounds like you got in a relationship, but I'm just saying. I don't know.
On the nose, but but that said, and I loved school. So what I learned when I was there was, and you've probably learned this in your own, I guess, um, your own studies. I listened to your interview with Dorian Vallejo because
Ah, yes.
I met him in my early days, and I didn't know about Myron. What's his last name? I
Barnstone.
embarrassed. Barnstone, not Barnston, right? I only learned about his training upon my return. Had I learned, I probably would have found him.
Yeah.
But there's so I didn't even know who to ask to study with at the time,
Yeah.
and I got lucky. But like my story about finding training is like so many people I know who are in realism, which is they didn't give up. They poo-pooed people poo-pooing us, even people in authority, maybe not, especially people in authority, people or abstract painting teachers. And the things
Mm,
that have been said to us were ridiculous. And none of us paid attention. We thought, surely I didn't. Surely there's someone out there who can teach me how to draw or draw better.
mm-hmm.
And in time, I found my people. But Myron, so I listened to a bit, and it sounds like, how long did you study with him? That's extremely cool,
Oh, wow. I didn't study with him long, but I've
but
known
long
him
enough.
for many, many years. And
Okay.
so I met him when I was 17. And actually, it was very interesting. I took 3 months with him when I was 17, but we didn't have a relationship, so I didn't stay around for 5 years. But um,
Well,
the
most people did actually stay around in art school. Back to that for years, because that's the thing I learned
oh,
was that realism takes years and years and years
yeah,
and years at your easel. So I I, I would have stayed longer at
yeah, it
school.
was. I feel slightly that I made a regret, a slight regret, because I met him for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll tell you the first, and then I went to college, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I went, so that was in Pennsylvania, and I went to college in Georgia. And so, and my aunt said to me, "I'm going to help you with college. Um, so you have a choice. Here's X amount of dollars, and you can either pay that towards your college, or you can pay it towards the studios." And I
Right.
thought, oh, let me go to college, right? The reality is, I would have learned more in 3 months at the studios, being there full time, or even, oh my God, if I would have been there for a year, then I would have, 16 years in college. It was just night and day. Um,
Yeah.
the quality, the intensity of the training. So I spent 3 months with Myron, but for about a year and a half to 2 years, I worked with a whole bunch of his students doing caricatures at the amusement park. And so when we weren't, doing our job, we would just talk design, composition. And so they,
Right.
they, they taught me a lot.
I'll bet.
And then I was hooked. I was obsessed with it, and spent the next several years pursuing it. got into graphic design, and so I was trying to use a lot of what he was teaching in these programs, which gave me a depth into the knowledge, because with the computer you could do things so fast that by hand would take hours to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe about 15 years ago, I got an opportunity to go back and study with him. Um, and so I was probably maybe about 30 or something, and uh, and I got to study full time, live there at the studios.
Fantastic.
Oh yeah, it was incredible. And then I worked with him selling his course and helping him with computer stuff, um,
Wow.
and design work for about the next 7 years. And so we just built
Amazing.
this beautiful friendship between each other. And he was he, he is, at least in memory, an incredible man. He was incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Real passion.
yeah,
And I know
yeah.
what a great, you're very fortunate. Wow.
And then he passed away a few years ago, and so now, you try to carry the mantle.
Yeah.
So, thanks for bringing that up. Now I'm a little.
Fun. Yeah. You're a
Uh,
little verklempt,
what was that?
as you should
Yeah,
be.
yeah, exactly.
A little verklempt, thinking about the great man. I
Yeah,
respect that. Sure.
very cool.
He deserves
Um,
to be honored for sure.
yeah, his devotion to the information was, he gave his life to it. And he taught me. He said, there are a lot of artists who want to teach, and so they do both, and then they never become good at either. And since
Mm.
he had his life as a teacher, I mean, as an artist, he then, when he had his daughter, decided that he'd come back to the States and start teaching. And when he did that, he created up all his artwork, and nobody's seen his artwork for the
Oh,
next 4 decades. It was all crated up, and then when he passed away, his daughter got it and uncrated it all, and now they're doing shows with it and stuff like that. And so it's been fascinating to see his work. Um,
wow.
yeah, um, but he didn't want to influence the students. He wanted them to develop their own style, their own voice, but have this incredible foundation, um, in drawing, uh, in composition, design, and understanding those systems. And so,
Incredible.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you were there for 5 years, and like, what were one or two things that really took root in you, that from the early beginnings of it, that you were like, okay, I own it and it owns me, in terms of a base of knowledge, or
And this dovetails into advice I'd give um, a younger person, but the only advice I feel I could give a younger artist is a realist one.
mm,
I don't feel equipped to speak to anyone other than that, but to uh, to stay on top of drawing from life. That certainly took root, and that the basis of painting and is not certainly not, of course, composition and design, but is drawing and understanding structure and value, and to develop that skill and keep it sharp, much like a musician or pianist has to continue to do scales to stay nimble.
mm-hmm,
And I know in my life, in my continued life, that continuing to draw and draw from life uh, keeps my confidence level at a decently even keel.
mm,
When the inevitable rejections come in, or the failures mount, or the blocks occur, or the paralysis comes to pay a call, um, knowing that I haven't lost it, that I can always go back, or that I must go back, is really important. And I would suggest that took root deeply, because that was the root of the training. Uh, that was it.
That's beautiful.
And that was key. Yeah. That there are no shortcuts.
Yeah,
There are no shortcuts.
got to do the work.
And I'm grateful. Yeah. And I'm grateful that I did it in a pre-smartphone era.
Now, when you were in the environment, were
Mm-hmm.
there many females, or were you one of few?
No, it wasn't in the 1850s, my good man. There we go. There's my laugh. What took you so long, Mr. Victor? Just kidding. Um, yes, there were many females of my species.
Of your species.
Quite a few, in fact.
That's cool. That's cool. The 1850s.
Isn't that true for you? It almost seems like half the class
You
is
know, when you
female.
say it, yeah, that's, um, I guess I always thought like it's cool because we live through this time where women have a voice. They've always had ideas, but never maybe just socially not a voice that was either
Have they
accepted.
always had ideas?
Yeah, they always had minds. Um,
I'm just kidding.
and
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's kind of cool that we live in this time where they have a voice, but now they also have um, the access to the training, right, to craft their voice. And so uh, I feel very, very lucky that I get to work with a lot of women, because when we look back on history, the stuff that they're going to say and speak through their artwork, it's it's exciting. It's exciting. So so, but when you're saying, yeah, I guess as I look back, there were always a lot of females in the art studio. And actually, it's kind of silly to even bring the question up because I think there are probably more women than men um, in those places. But I guess when you bring up Florence and you think of Italy, uh, my imagination kind of goes to this old school place, and that's probably why I was inspired to ask that question. Um,
Right.
but
Flips into history.
yeah, so thank you for
Yeah.
bringing me back to reality, um, or
You know,
back
I
to
have
the
such power.
yeah,
What do you know?
I
Tell
skipped
it
a
to my
stone a little
kids.
too far. uh so so there, and now, what's the process of an atelier like when you're going through that? You're there for 5 years, but like, is there like a system that you go through? Like, do they only let you use these tools and learn this kind of thing, and then they move on to something? You graduate to different levels.
There was a process. I will say, though, it has greatly changed. It's now a proper institution, the Florence Academy of Art, where you can get accreditation, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a much more uh, strict curriculum and process. Whereas when I went, it was fairly lax, and but the nuts and bolts were all we had were the nuts and bolts, and a fairly vague process. I say vague, but it was also distinctly organic,
Mm-hmm.
and made a lot of sense. And I'll explain that to you. We started with the longest put in pencil with
Mm-hmm.
the figure, a 2 week pose, three
Oh
hours
wow.
in the morning pose. So 3 times 5, 15, a 30-hour pose. So 3 hours, Monday through Friday in the morning for 2 weeks. None of us in the room, there are probably 20 first year students, had ever drawn anything for that long. And I'd venture to say that I learned 25% of all that I was going to learn the coming years in those first 2 weeks. I've never said that before, actually, because all of us encountered our limits very quickly. I would say all of us were probably, the best drawers in our high school class kind of
Yeah.
person, and had certainly had, again, native talent, but no one had been pushed to see. So the teachers were critical in the first 6 months of development because their eye was so developed, and
Mm.
we were constantly told to erase, erase, erase because, for example, this female model, I remember I couldn't see. I had reached the limit of my ability to see what was wrong and what was right with my drawing.
Mm.
And in walked the teacher with the plumb line and his tool and his sharp eye. And he said, look, you have to move it over, a quarter of an inch here, an eighth of an inch there. And I remember my eyes rolling to the back of my head because I thought, oh yeah, that's just so little. I'm expected to notice that. But of course I was expected to notice that, and I really wanted to. I erased, erased, erased. I tell it to my youngest child, who's a good drawer. I said, don't believe the hype about, whatever you express has any worth. Your eraser is your best friend, and sleep with it. If you want to develop your eye, you're going to be erasing a lot. And that's what we did those first 2 weeks. Erased, 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 and refined, 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 until finally our mind's eye caught up with our visual eye. And so once we did competently with the pencil, we moved on to charcoal. But the entire time in the afternoon session, we were set up with the charcoal to do plaster casts. So first morning was from life and pencil. The morning and the afternoon was plaster casts drawn in charcoal. And that went on for several months. And then the morning pencil drawings became larger,
Mm-hmm.
and we shifted to charcoal as well. And I would say on average, people did it for at least a year. They really would have preferred, they meaning the two main teachers, that we did it longer, but a lot of students were eager to move to painting, and they
Mm-hmm.
acceded to that, the pressure. They acceded to my desire to do so. And so I started painting earlier with a limited palette, and a limited palette remained the case for all the time that I was there. So it's been very hard for me to actually, well, I forced myself to branch out from my limited palette, but it is the backbone of my work, despite some of it being high chroma. It informs how I approach my work, even when it is high chroma, which is to try to keep it as simple as possible, as unified as possible, and not necessarily go overboard. But if I do, try to keep it somewhat unified. So the limited palette was essentially a Zorn palette,
Mm-hmm.
and which I didn't know about then. Of course, I loved a new Zorn, but we didn't call it the Zorn palette. I don't even really remember what we called it. Probably Gérôme's palette in the 19th century, who we
Mm-hmm.
were descended from.
How do you
Apparently,
know
we
that?
were, no, meaning my teacher's teacher's teacher was Gérôme.
Yes.
That's what I mean. And
Oh
he
my
was very
goodness.
proud of that, which I didn't
Oh,
give a
you're
whit
saying
about
your
at the
teacher
time.
was?
Oh yeah. And then of
Okay,
course
okay.
by extension I was, but of course I didn't care about that when I was young. I thought, oh, okay, whatever.
Now it
Jerome
means
is so
something.
fussy. Now it means something. Now I think it's awesome. But anyway,
Exactly.
yeah. So then when we graduated to painting, we started with still life and then the model. And we would find a model who would sit. So we started with heads and still lives. And then the nude, small nude. The figure itself was probably, because I remember 16 by 20 was the size of the page. So, would fit in that arena,
Mm-hmm.
that page. And that's how it progressed. That is how it progressed.
Wow.
Oh, sorry. Before we painted with a limited palette, we would also paint our plaster cast. I'm
Okay.
not being clear. Let me rewind. The very first thing we painted was not a still life, it was our plaster cast with an even more limited palette. Well, we had probably 4 colors we were allowed, 4 pigments: burnt sienna, yellow ochre, ivory black, and lead white. I've only ever used lead white. And
Oh wow.
my lead count is low. Anyway, in my blood. So
I got it.
yeah, good. I because real
Mixing your
trainers
coffee
tend to be
with a
quite neat. I know. Yeah, no, we tend to be very neat. I mean, you probably know
yes.
that. So
Yes.
I'm not smearing anything around. Although I've gotten sloppier, I want to say. I don't know
Do you
why,
like the
but
sloppierness?
no, it irritates me. Like, God
Mm.
damn it, I got pain in my hands. What's wrong with me? But,
Yeah, it's a
you
strange
know,
thing, as a teacher, I'm like, yeah, we could just, draw all the time there. I mean, you can really spend, like kindergarten to 12th grade, like teaching people how to draw. You never need to touch paint, really. And primarily, I've always stayed away from teaching paint because
hmm.
I don't like getting it messy, and I definitely don't want to be around people who are messy. And it would literally just irritate me to the point I'd scream if I had to live in that environment where it's like, oh, I put my hand down on a desk and now I got oil paint on me. There goes another pair
Oh
of
yeah,
pants, like, um, yeah. So,
apron, baby, apron.
yeah,
I'm
those,
wearing my apron right
yeah,
now.
you are,
Yeah,
those
I
little
am.
old grandma moo dresses, like,
Yeah, no,
like,
no. The most attractive apron with a belt.
oh shoot,
None of
imagine,
that odd nerdrum look for me.
yeah, it's very odd, huh?
Hmm. Very odd.
So, um, you develop these realism skills, which, when looking at your work, uh, still is absolutely present. Um, but then there's this other dimension to your work, and I'm kind of curious where that vibration comes in. Um, where did that education come from?
The world. Okay.
Mm.
No. Yes. Where did that education come from?
Yeah, because it's really a command of a certain knowledge base that you have that then you're merging and you're marrying with this other knowledge base of the realism. Um,
Uh-huh.
and so I'm saying education because it's ultimately a knowledge base that you have, and I'm almost certain that they're not teaching you this almost metaphysical thinking in a realism environment. But
That's true.
yeah, so where does this come from?
That comes from my desire to paint what is important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I didn't want to be, I envied people. I still envy them, but a little less. Just doesn't keep me up at night. Who are so in love with realism. I mean, I'm in love with the craft. I admire it like nothing else. I would wallpaper my walls with basically nude charcoal drawings, but I don't want to give my children a heart attack. Um, but I love it, love it, love it. But sticking to it strictly has not ever felt right. But I don't want to stray too far from it, mainly
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't, for years, trust that what I was doing was any good. I think when I tried to venture outside the lines, to other people's eyes, I was hardly venturing outside of any lines, but I knew I was. I was afraid of wasting my time and life by creating shit
Mm.
and trying to, okay, I haven't had to explain this for a while, except to myself, but trying to sync, things are coming back to me from my head to my gut.
Mm-hmm.
It was what I wanted to do and to paint from my gut, paint from the third eye, but I had to trust. myself, and I didn't because I wasn't raised. I'm not going to blame my upbringing, but I have to point to it because I wasn't acculturated to think artistically, to think from my gut.
Mm.
And I had to shove my teachers out, my expectations, the whole culture, and listen. And I knew that that was where my future as, say, an artist and not just a painter lay. I wanted to become an artist. That's a word
Mm-hmm.
that's bandied around a lot, and I find it a sacred word and
Yes.
one that you earn. And I didn't feel I earned it. I think I
Mm.
can call myself one now because I want to. Not so much that I think I am, but I've, I felt I wouldn't have felt I've wasted my life if I tried to find a way to paint from my gut on this two-dimensional surface. And I think it's in some ways an easier road for a musician, an easier road for a writer, not creating, not the creative process, but their fields lend itself to third eye expression. And two-dimensionality, unless you become a surrealist, is much harder, in my opinion, without seeming being terrible or just downright weird. I didn't want to be the painter who would paint a nude with, standing inexplicably somewhere with a bird on her nose and, you know,
Yeah.
gas coming out of her ass and then labeling it Athena ascends to the netherworld in transcendence. I'm like, give me a break. That's a very heavy-handed title for this weird
Exactly.
image, and it doesn't work. So, if I had to err on one side, I would err on the side of the way, which is process. Doesn't matter what you paint, it's how you paint. Therein lies God for me. The apex is that, as well as, command of everything that's required, composition, design, drawing, and
Yep.
idea. That's the apex, right? How many
Yep.
great painters, not all their paintings achieve that, but that's the goal. And the hardest thing is composition, frankly. Uh, anyway, so I had another seminal moment. I'm one of those people who searches for them, and when they arrive, I notice maybe once every 5 years or so.
Beautiful.
And I literally walked into my studio and I said to myself, "Let's pump it up." And I was I I didn't realize I was at a threshold of change until I was at the threshold and I walked over. But of course, both feet, one was on one side, one was the other. And I walked forward into my new life as someone who could access that, starting to access that gut and that feeling and to trust my toolkit. That's the key. Can I trust what I know? And can I be okay with failure in quotes and
Mm.
sometimes really not in quotes at all? And the answer was, yeah, more than not, but I have to try because I'm going to die at some point, hopefully later rather than sooner. And I want to know that I'm dying pursuing the highest, coming from the place of greatest integrity, which was my heart and my gut. But I didn't know how to get there with this
Beautiful.
skill. And I said, that's what's worth doing with my life. And I want to be doing that when I kick. And so it takes a while. It took me a long time to trust myself and
Mm-hmm.
trust that gut and trust my ideas. And I'm still working on it. And I still dip or I'll, head into more realism because I'll get work in, painting more traditional still lives, or I'll get work painting just upfront portraiture. And I still love it. And I realize I need variety and I'll jump around. But that's where that began. And it's taken me years for it to flower, if you will. So that part is flowering and
I
it
love
continues
that.
to flower as I do realism as well and keep up my drawing practice and my eyes sharp.
It's beautiful.
I could, okay, I could keep talking, but I don't want to be the endless talker.
No, like, um, it I love it because, you know, I've seen that issue with realism uh, painters, uh, And when looking at your work, it's like, whoa, you're one of, in my opinion, one of the few that have been able to cross that line.
Oh,
And
high praise. Thank you.
and 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 I'm being genuine in that. It's
Thank you.
um even when I was at the studios, I remember, and I think you might have heard this when I was talking to uh, Darian. Like the one of the issues that often happened was that people would come into the studios, find this new knowledge, and then throw away the passion that got them there because they just thought, oh, until I get this academic knowledge, nothing else mattered. And so they become super, super academic, which was beautiful because their skill level was incredible, but it lacked
Right.
this life. And one day I remember being young, seeing that and saying, no, 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 no. Like this is this is the higher level, but you don't throw away all that got you there, right? And so over the years,
Right.
um, I would see people come out of these studios or those studios, and their skill level was incredible, but it didn't have the soul and the and it didn't have the creativity or the conceptualization that that was in par with the skill of the rendering and the painting and the control of their mediums and of the medium. And there was to me always a disconnect, like you just said, putting the bird on their nose. And the way I always articulate it is that if you're trying to conceive an idea purely out of nouns, then you'll get some weird looking image like that.
Oh,
And
that's
it's like,
interesting. Explain that.
okay, well, if you're focused primarily on form and noun and object and that which you can see, touch, hear, taste, and feel,
Right.
then that becomes the vocabulary and everything then becomes symbolism. And symbolism doesn't touch the soul. It only touches an aspect of the mind because you need to understand the language behind the symbolism. But
Don, that's brilliant. I love that.
this is why I get paid the good money. No. Um, but if you
Nice.
go and you pursue what you pursued, right? So in Socrates, Plato explains it this way in the Republic that there's this threefold, right, where you tap into inspiration, and then once you explore that information, then you have to articulate it. You have to have the grammar. You have to begin to form it. And I think that's where the realism artists are incredible at. They're incredible at making it solid. And then the third part is the expression of it. But you don't have anything to express if you never explored, right?
Right.
So if you spend
Right.
your whole life examining and mastering the examinations and stuff, then you have
Mm-hmm.
this incredible skill there, but you're not expressing anything because it's not inspired by anything. And so therefore you're not an artist. You're just an incredible interpreter, copier, things like that. But your
Right.
journey has given you this incredible vocabulary to articulate these aka esoteric concepts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at your work as this beautiful merging. If you had a conversation with Sargent and Van Gogh, your work
Ooh.
would be the conversation that would be the presence between the two. Like,
Wow. I
sit
can
on there for,
die now.
I mean, don't, because there's more to come out of you. It's
Mm.
just that you know you don't have paintings, you have experiences, right?
Mm.
And so you
Right.
look at it and you're just like, oh my God, the skill. Like I'm looking at your work and I'm just feeling jealous, right? It's
Yeah.
incredible jealousy, which is great, right? It makes me want to go draw more. Like I'm like, damn it, like I gotta go. Um,
Damn.
and yet I feel not only the beauty of its form, but this clarity of understanding that you're not only seeing your object or your idea, but you're feeling that object and you're articulating both. And
Mm.
to me, that's the apex. It's when you're able to get that where you can feel it, you can perceive it, and you can see it, that's the experience. And someone can just go to your website, click through the work, and it's like every single one, you're tapping into that,
Wow. Thank
and
you for that. Wow, that feels great.
yeah,
You see that.
it's amazing. So
Wow.
so we're like, you have this beautiful, like almost like this pulling of your brush, I guess. I don't know what it is, but um it reminds me of Van Gogh in the sense that you can like, you just don't
The
see
hatching.
sky, but you feel, yeah, the hatching,
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's my natural way. And so I pushed it. I allowed it to effloresce.
so when you say your natural way, like when did you discover that in yourself?
Middle school,
Really?
really.
Wow.
I think a lot of drawers are, that's, I'm going to make this up because I haven't
Mm-hmm.
thought about it, but that is one way that a lot of people do draw naturally, is hatching.
Mm-hmm.
And in my art teacher took me under her wing and was very encouraging. Hey, I'm shouting out to you, Miss Bazzy. We called her Bazzy. Miss Basilevsky, the Russian lady, one of the two women in my
Oh.
all-girls school who was allowed to wear pants. The other was a kindergarten teacher. Understandably, she probably had to sit in the ground. But Miss Bazzy was very supportive, and she encouraged my hatching as a way to, obviously create form. And I simply continued with it, and it came out again more actively at art school. So, and
Wow.
then with painting, yeah, I realized that was when I said to myself, "Let's pump it up." That's what I did.
Oh, really? It's
Yeah,
interesting how we're always looking for the new, the new, the new.
right.
And oftentimes
There's
it's
pressure
like,
to. There's pressure to, unfortunately,
and the
in a
secret
way that.
oftentimes is to go back. When those things were pure to you, like
Oh,
around that
yes,
early teenage years,
yeah.
you know, um, it's like every person that I know who is extremely successful at something,
Uh-huh.
if you ask them, well, what did you want to be when you were between the ages of 12 and 14? It's
That's
like,
what I wanted to be.
yeah, that's what they're doing. And so
That
it's
was
like,
certainly the case for me. I was going to be either a painter, artist, or a comedian.
and you're all three. No.
I mean, an actress or comedian. I know. And then I had it. My first seminal moment was in college, and I knew I was being heavily encouraged to become an actress,
Mm,
and I loved it. But I was fortunate to see James Lipton. I might be conflating some memories, but I feel like it was a James Lipton interview of
James
Sally
Lee.
Field. I know who just died, but I have a
Oh,
feeling
really?
it wasn't. Anyway, I saw her interviewed or read an interview, and she said, "Listen, acting is hard enough. There's so many reasons not to do it, and there's so many things about it that are hard. And if you have one too many excuses not to, I wouldn't do it." And I heard that. I heard that
Mm,
because I had one too many excuses not to pursue it, but I had none. I had on those horse blinders when I thought about going to art school because I
yeah.
knew I'd wake up at 40, dreadfully old, and would be terribly bitter if I hadn't pursued it.
Yes.
Right. I still love acting, but I don't regret my decision.
It's interesting because I can see an actor in your paintings.
Oh,
Like,
really?
oh,
No
absolutely.
way.
I mean, you said that, it made total sense to me.
Huh.
Because what is an actor? It's just a channeler, right? Someone who
That's true.
channels in frequency or character, whatever you want to call it. It's all the same thing. Like this energy, just
It's
having
a
that
good point.
sensitivity, and then to communicate story. Lead people in this emotional journey. So it's very clear that you get that, and now
Interesting.
that makes sense. Um,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, these are
That's
cool.
cool.
I do see the influence of the realism palette. um, in your work, which is kind of neat. Um, did you guys do a lot, like as you got further into the Florence Academy? Did you push? Um, did they focus a lot on color?
No, no,
Really?
they really no, they really focus on value
Okay,
and
gotcha.
and just turning the form, and they emphasize that you need very little, and that's still true. I mean, it's interesting
Mm-hmm.
that you said it's important to look back and to go back when things were pure, and I will do that as one of many practices I'll do about trying to be mindful and present and prayerful
Mm-hmm.
with my life, my day in my life, as I will, if I'm feeling despairing or stuck, I will remember the joy of it and just the sheer need and desire, pure desire to create form. And that's it, without explanation. And that'll help guide me. But, um, and I recently was looking at the work of a few people who work with a very limited palette, and they achieve so much form, and yet
Mm,
they trick the eye. And I'm thinking about a few portraits in particular. My brain thinks it sees more color than is really actually there, but they're more alive in their form than others that are littered with hypercolor and not
mm-hmm.
enough attention to value. And I revere that. I revere that ability to create form and know your edges. And but I personally need to push that, and I obviously don't always succeed, but I've needed to push it and try to find, push and pull, um, what I was given. uh, I hop between camps of being using high chroma and then using very little.
Yeah.
But I want to add that my still lives of the past few years have been very limited palette, and that's kind of my way of uh, keeping that in my back pocket, mainly because my still lives are also focused on natural elements, like literally bark, and creating. I'm really influenced by Pan Asian scroll work of centuries,
Mm,
the simplicity and the tightness of. I went to your tightness of the negative space, and I went to your Facebook page before we spoke and saw or read an explanation you have of a painting whose name escapes me, but you're using the language of the composition that you teach, and I don't have a handle on that language
oh, was it
exactly.
the
But
Delaroche painting with the guy who got
wasn't
killed?
it Delrush? Yes, with the
Yeah.
huge. And I'm not familiar with that, which is a little embarrassing. But I mean, I majored in art history. I'm sure I've seen it and studied it, and I might have thought it was
Hey,
really boring. Isn't that terrible? Now, of
no,
course, I
not
would
at
love
all,
it.
actually.
I love composition, and actually my love of it is only has grown. Thank God. But not that it necessarily is that evident. I have to become more complicated with my paintings, but uh, yeah, it was very impressive. I liked what you did, and I was. It seemed to explain how I've tried to ingest mainly the works of Caravaggio all these years about his
Mm,
ability to work with negative space. I derive tremendous inspiration from him. I'm going all over the map.
no, no, no. It's
Sorry, I'm jumping
beautiful.
around.
It's beautiful.
I tend to do that. Okay.
Um, it's funny you said about the art appreciation. I always boast like I have the world's greatest art appreciation course, and the whole thing is when the time you go through it, you'll know 100 paintings,
Uh
but
huh.
you will not know one artist name, title, or date because in the end, that's all irrelevant. Um,
So
it's not
true.
totally irrelevant. You should probably know the name of the artist, but dates, all that stuff, it's like I'll tell you this story, and I've probably
It's
told
good.
it a few times on here. I was at this art museum, and this guy's giving a tour, and there's all these little white-haired ladies like, "Oh, this is amazing," and so I'm listening, and um, he starts talking about this box and it's painting, right? And inside this box, there's all this stuff, and he's going on about the political, social, coronavirus. No, I'm just joking, because there's a thing of to
Yeah, yeah.
mark this episode.
Okay.
And all this stuff about what was going on outside of the studio, right? And so my approach is, if you study art right, and especially if you do it through the language of design, you not only stay in the studio, but you actually go into the psyche and the soul of the artist, because to read design is to read decisions, and each
Yes.
decision is a deliberate, conscious, mark, right? It's not intuitive, it's not accidental, especially when you start studying from a math perspective. It's all done deliberately. And so inside this box, there's this violin, and it forms this beautiful dominant diagonal. And so your eye follows down this dominant diagonal, and there's this little beautiful curve at the end, which is a broken string on the guitar, on the violin. And that arabesque moves you up, and there's this dominant vertical. It also happens to be the dominant contrast in the painting, which is this white candlestick. And then as your eye goes through there, there's this little smoke at the top of the candlestick. And then there's this beautiful curve, which is this piece of paper that has written on it music. But then it fades, and then the rest of the bottom of the paper is blank. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm like, and I bring the guy over. I'm like, I heard what you said and all, but when I read the painting, I think this is a painting about someone who died.
Huh.
And he said, that's interesting. He said, the year that this painting was painted, the artist's father died, and he was a musician.
Oh.
And so the candle went out. You can't play the music anymore because the violin is broken and the music was never finished, right?
Wow. Yeah.
It had nothing to do with the political, social nonsense of what was going outside of the man's studio. It had to get, it was an homage to his dead father. And and to me, it just, in that moment, I was like, okay, I gotta show people how to read a painting, because they're missing it. And I learned so much through life, about life, by decoding these paintings. It's incredible. There's this one, Rockwell, real quick, that we were laughing about it last week, because Rockwell has this little sense of perverted humor, which actually made me fall in love with him when I was 11, because he was talking about how when he was a kid, they had this little group that they would meet with each other in this abandoned building, and they would look at the African ladies in the National Geographic because they were topless. And
of course,
I remember being 11, dying laughing, because my parents loved science so much that they gave me all these National Geographics, but it was only to look at the African ladies in there. And I was like, but we bonded. And
that is so funny. That is so true. Oh my God. I remember being shocked, I tell you, shocked. I
know. So anyways, but
it's priceless.
But last week we were looking at this painting, and it was these two girls who were holding these photos of the same guy, right? And then the mailbox was exactly the same and stuff. And it's just funny because you're looking at the design, pulling it apart, and then all of a sudden at their feet, these women have these two, garden tools, these hoes. and they're crossing over each other, right? And you're just like, crossing hoes. What's going on here? Like, and then it clicked to us, and we were just like, oh my God, this guy was brilliant. Like, the commentary that he would talk about, and just kind of like subtly put it in there was just funny.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I like that. Wow, and you're re-inspiring me, and your inspiration is really is exciting, and I appreciate hearing your passion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate looking at your passion. This is
great.
You know, I'm looking at this one right now. Reminds me of a Maxfield Parrish painting. Um,
One of my heroes.
yeah,
Yep.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Reminds me of
Nice.
the who's the guy with the wings? Um, who melted the
Pegasus or
wings?
Bellerophon? Oh, Icarus. Yeah.
Icarus, the painting of Icarus.
The
Um,
Daedala, the female.
the one where he's just. Oh, your
Uh,
painting here is
oh, what do you
the
mean?
red
Oh, yeah.
sun. I'm looking at the
Yes.
red sun.
Red Sun. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's this beautiful painting that Maxfield does where Icarus is leaning forward, right? And so when you look at the noun, right, of what's happening, he's
Right.
his feet are fully planted on the ground, but the plumb line of the center of his skull is like leaning in, right? It's like leaning
Mm-hmm.
forward. And so you almost feel like he's going to tip over.
Yeah.
But it's balanced out with these little birds that are flying and it has like his little wings, but he's holding a sword. He has a sword by his hip, and you're thinking, why in the world does Icarus have a sword? Makes no sense.
Huh.
But when you squint your eyes, just squint them a little bit, all of a sudden the values of the lower part of his shins and feet just fade away into the background, and you actually literally see him take flight. And
Oh
the
my gosh,
and
that's
the
amazing.
sword becomes this contrast, which actually makes you feel like you saw his feet move up. Oh, it's
Huh.
incredible! It's absolutely incredible.
Oh, I can't wait to look that up.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
just Maxwell Parrish Icarus, and then just look at it, and then squint your eyes, and all of a sudden you just feel him lift. Yeah, it's
Wow, I
cool.
will. That's cool.
Very very
All
cool.
right.
So
Yeah.
so you through your hatching, you merged
Yes.
that, let's say, your first 20 years with your second 20 years,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
now you have this beautiful combination, this beautiful thing, um, which is very unique. This is very you. And
Hmm.
um, so, what are you
What
currently
now?
working on right now then with this?
I will tell you. I actually have a distinct answer to that. I'm moved by animism.
Mm,
Uh, I'm a, and I don't know how to explain this simply, so I'm just going to do an imperfect job of this. Uh, I'm intrigued by. It's also somewhat timely with the world in which we live, of the climate crisis finally sinking into the consciousness of most people on the globe, and that's great. But I'm intrigued by the pre-Christian era of life, a more indigenous life, an
mm-hmm,
animist life of when humans in their little tribes and dotted across the globe did have interactive relationships with with their world, um, and I've been studying with, intrigued by the work of a lot of people, more famous ones that you might have heard of, who are still animists in their own lives, but have crossed over and are teaching some of those ways to the West. One of them is a man named, who you might have heard of, I think one of the more famous. He's from East Africa, Northeast or Northwest, I'm not sure. Name, I think it's actually East West. Um, Malidoma, Patrice Tomei. Have you heard of him?
no.
Malidoma, he's known as. Okay. And how about Martin Prechtel? Heard of him?
Why does that one
Anyway,
sound
those are
familiar? The second one sounds familiar, actually.
because I think he's pretty well known. I mean, I once it's like learning a new vocab word. As soon as you learn it, you see it everywhere. These are I don't know enough about his work, quite honestly, but I found some of his books very similar to people who are emerging in the world of the past 20 years or so to the West, who are deeply ensconced in their animist view of, of life. And there are overlapping themes involving a relationship with the ancestors. That's something that my culture, our American culture, I don't know your history, your ancestral history, but mine is, I'm really American. I've been here since the Mayflower. I have two
Really?
Mayflower, yep, passenger antecedents, which is, as a lover of history, somewhat of a lover of history, lover of genealogy and ancestry, I'm really grateful for, because that's something to hang my hat on. But all my ancestors are very English,
Hmm.
Northern European types who fled, long, long ago. But my sense of my ancestral roots is very thin, even though I have a lot of bones in this country and I visited a lot of graves.
Hmm.
Um, I I yearn for that, and that's what I'm also painting. It's not only my love of what I'm cultivating is my own form of animism, being an animist, which sounds like being a pagan, and it's not unrelated, but it's somewhat related. Cultivating that, and you see it everywhere from Wiccans or spiritual people. People are trying to embrace our natural world and make it a part of us the way it used to be,
Hmm.
in a natural way, in a way that was unthinking, rather. People are definitely turning towards that. And I'm turning towards that in my work, trying to find a way to express it. And I'll tell you what I'm doing right now, which, again, if I had got the diagnosis, this is how I try to lead my life. If I got the bad news, what would I want to be doing with my work? The rest of my life is something different, but with my work, I'd want to be pursuing, my deepest work and trying. And that's what I'm doing right now. And that will change. But so embracing, cultivating a relationship with my ancestors and with the natural world through, I'm trying to cultivate a more indigenous understanding. It's very hard to do that since I'm not indigenous, but we are all indigenous once. We just came from a
Yeah.
different place. A certain way of being with the world um, is what I'm trying to do. And
Hmm.
I read somewhere, some artist said what he tries to paint. I can't remember who it was, but I said, you know what, I'm going to lift that because it speaks to me. Is I'm trying to paint what's missing. And so what I'm trying to do is try to complete a picture. And what's missing is that, certainly for me, in my deepest heart. And one way that Indigenous man and what we all do to create meaning in life is through ritual. I think we all know that.
Hmm.
And we're lacking in ritual and celebration from
Mm.
the heart, from the
Yes.
heart. And so what I'm working on right now are these two paintings in particular, inspired by, there's a show that's out there, I won't name it or where, but the theme was female heroes, sheroes. And what came to mind to me, and I really went deep, was the woman, Julia Butterfly Hill, who 20 years ago, 21 years ago, sat for 738 days in an old redwood tree in California on a small platform to preserve it from being cut down. This old
Mm.
growth tree, 1,000-year-old tree. And she succeeded, a young woman in her early 20s. She got down after over 2 years from that platform high up in the tree, and they didn't cut it down, and they preserved some of that area. And I have yet to find words to describe what it takes to sit on a platform like that and deal with the bullshit she had to deal with while sitting up there,
Yep.
how they tried to get her down. But just the deprivation, the grit is, the words are thin, but she's kind of like an old time, old school monk of sorts.
Hmm.
The fortitude, none of us come close to what she did. And so she's a hero of mine. And so I've followed her. I'm kind of a fan, and I've given her money to some of her causes over the years. And I decided I'd like to paint her on a piece of old growth redwood if I could find one.
Oh wow.
And I did. And then I contacted her. She's in the public arena, so I could take a photograph of her if I wanted, but I wanted her blessing. And she
Of course.
granted it my blessing and her blessing. And so I did that. So I'm working on that. And in conjunction, I'm working on, I, I moved to painting on dye bond or aluminum
Okay.
because it's, the hard substrate is means it won't crack. It's lighter, thinner, um, easier to mail. So many reasons why it's a good idea, at least in my opinion. But I have some old stretcher bars, and they're large for me, for a realist, 4 feet square. And I decided I'd stretch it the old way, like the way I used to, which is with rabbit skin glue, doing it myself, prime it, prepare it, and just use it because I have it. And just stick my neck out. This isn't going to any show in particular. I hope it will, but I have to focus when I need to paint. And so I was inspired by Julia, and I decided to paint, and my idea of ritual and animism and relationship, and also of a certain degree of uh, need for reparation of sorts, which is a heavy word of
Okay.
someone who's white and privileged like myself. But by that I mean, this is a long answer, but it's a true one. Is the my second great grandfather, who I heard all about, was a rags to riches story, orphaned, and then in the 19th century got a lot of shit done. I said shit a lot in this podcast. And one of them was, unfortunately, he was a man of his time. He became one of the timber barons of Michigan. So he's one of the few people who successfully raped the state. Again, he was a man of his time. But I've known this story since I was a girl, and about this grandfather. And it was the whole narrative of my family starts with him.
Mm.
And I always felt guilty, like historical guilt for what he did. And now as a adult and trying to figure out what to paint, what's worth painting, this is the themes of animism and is flowering in my work. And so I'm doing this painting of the view of a stump of a white pine, which is what they cut down in Michigan, which is a pretty big tree. And I'm reluctant to put too many words to it. I want the words to come once it's done, but I'll throw a few out there, which is
Mm-hmm.
ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Again, reparation, a nod to, uh, you know, certainly using some form of symbolism, like an old Icelandic saw, which they would have used to cut it down. I'm trying to use my gut to guide me, the design and the symbolisms, they can't be too obvious, to suggest women who are unidentified, doesn't matter who they are, um, involved in ritual on this stump. And it is my way, and the title I know, which is grandfather. So that refers to not
Yeah.
only my physical grandfather, but the tree as
Mm.
well, and to our history, this old stump. So, and my hope, of course, is always that someone will be moved by it, and won't understand fully what's going on. I like to try to cultivate the mystery. And how do you cultivate mystery without being obvious? That's the hard part. Kind of have to come through the back door, not overthink. So that's what I'm working on. And I have another huge piece of redwood, which I'm going to, I think, paint the idea of the totem, because we all had
Mm-hmm.
the notion of a totem. I have learned is not so much that you have a spirit animal, but that your ancestors were the people who fed your ancestors. And
Mm.
totems were made of the people who fed you, and who fed you were animals. And who fed the animals was usually plants or other animals. Those were also our ancestors. So I'm really moved by that, another animist theme. And I think I'm going to paint that of sorts, and I don't quite know how, on this other piece of redwood. And that's where you meet me, as well as other kind of work for shows that are more kind of straight up. I'd love to show all this new work that's emerging, and that's kind of my next goal.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. I, I don't
I'm
want to.
sorry to
Yeah.
talk a lot, but
No, no, no,
there's a
no.
lot
That
to
was
say.
beautiful, beautiful, and I love
Okay. Okay.
the work you're doing and the reason why you're doing it. Um, I the podcast I just recorded before you, we got into this whole conversation about the sacred relationship between us and trees and
Ah,
the communication, and we ultimately came to this idea that we both want to start asking permission. You know, like we know we can or we
oh
should,
yes.
but just having permission from what we're painting or drawing. We even said like going into someone's house,
Yes.
even though they opened a door, but just stopping and consciously asking permission, and ultimately what we eat, taking a
Praising it.
moment of, yeah, and just having that more conscious relationship with creation, in all of its forms.
Beautiful. That's very animist too.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
is thanking and being aware of everything because everything has spirit.
It's my only caveat to what you said is I wouldn't separate your Judeo-Christian ideas because um, we often think of Judeo-Christian being this Western faith, and it's not. It's actually an
Mm,
Eastern North African faith, right? And
that's true. That's true. Middle Eastern, yeah.
and so
I mean,
once you kind of,
Jesus was a Jew from the Middle East.
yeah, and
Yeah.
there's a great video out there on Chinese, the
Oh,
Chinese when they first started 4,500 years ago, and built in their language is actually basically the Torah. Like it's
really?
insane. Oh my gosh! Like they use pictographs just like the Hebrews did back in the old, like the first language, and they have things like, for example, their word for temptation is two trees and a woman. You're like,
No.
what? Yeah, yeah, and it's 4,500 years old language, right? So and they came back from this time. It's very interesting. You can go find it, but um, I, it's there has been a perversion of the Judeo-Christian faith, but when you get in its core, I remember when I was in my 20s, back in college, and I was really into like studying scriptures, and I loved taking the time to go through the Hebrew and the Greek and really learning the words, what these things meant,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
and there was this one little thing, it's to go into all of creation and preach the gospel, right? Okay, I got that. The gospel, good news. But what in the world does that mean? Like, go preach to all creation. And so I looked it up, and it doesn't just mean people. It means
Hmm.
anything created, animals, nature, buildings, laws. And I was like, whoa, what? Like, what is this quote Great Commission? Like it, what, you know? And
Wow.
to me, it's far more than just, hey, Jesus died for you. Like that kind of thing to
Right.
another person. Like, and that's even affected me with my own children. Like, I didn't want to bring my children to a church and have them be Christianized or religionized, because my thinking
Hmm.
was, if anybody, these kids who were just born probably have a better, more truer relationship with God than we do. And
Right.
so, how do I not, if they have to learn about God, then that which they're learning isn't real. That's how so for years, I would be frustrated because I was like, I hope I'm not hurting my children. And
Oh,
then,
wow.
and then one day, uh, the Spirit just said, pray, start praying. And then that's how I developed that relationship with the kids. It was never a, hey, I have to teach you about this. It just was cultivated. And, um, and so it was very, very cool. But the whole animist thing, when I just read the definition of it, I'm like, yeah, it's interesting because that's actually one of a lot of people say that the academy that I have is much more like a temple. Like it's
Mm.
we're dealing with a priesthood of people versus just making artists. And my mentor, he came up with this idea, and I just embraced it. He said, what we're producing is shamans. You know,
Hmm.
we're the doctors, the psychologists, the healers, the artists, the craftspeople of our tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was talking to a lady earlier who's an artist and used to be a dentist, you know. And I said, well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe your tribe is dentists, and you can become the shaman of that, the art person of that group, you know.
Yeah.
And but one of the things that we do with our artwork, and I see you tapping into this, is understanding that everything created has energy, and a spirit is just that which animates an idea, feeling, or thought.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter if you believe it or not. Everything you make is going to trigger an idea, feeling, or thought. And either you're conscious of it and you participate in that so that you can best accurately have it transmit that feeling, thought, or or idea, or you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the ideas that we design from is what we call the peripheral, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what we mean by that is that when you're creating artwork, you're not just putting on the art on the wall for one to look face to face with it, but uh, the experience people are going to have with artwork isn't face to face as much as it's in the peripheral.
Right.
So and so
I like to
therefore,
say the back door. Yeah.
perfect,
Slipping in
the
through the
back
back
door.
door. Yeah.
And so therefore, you have to build your work to resonate on that subconscious, unaware, and yet you're still within it, right?
Yes.
Aspect. And that's where design composition comes in, because the unseen part is what we are feeling with our artwork. And then when we actually turn and we look face to face, then that's where you get into where's your skill, you know, as a painter, a drawer, like, because now we're, you know, now you're having a different experience, right?
Yeah.
But and then how do you take that which you're conscious of and subconscious and make them harmonize so that they're speaking the same story, right?
That's the task.
And that's the yeah.
And that's the hard part. And that's, yeah.
Well, it's hard for some people. Um,
Fine. Hard for me. Hard for me. But it's a worthy goal.
yeah, and
It's
and
worthy.
and someone like yourself who has this incredible talent in the realism training, and now merging it with this other aspect, man, it's why artists live so long. As long as they don't have some weird venereal disease or smoke themselves to death, uh, we tend to live very long because we get to wake up every day like enthusiastic, you know, like, you know,
You're right.
we have this energy flowing through us, you know, like we get to make, like, create stuff, you know. um
Yeah.
and
I
so
think it's also because we get to be alone.
I think so too.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
no,
Well,
I totally
we
agree.
can do it now. Yeah. I mean, we can do it now. I mean, ah, when I think back when Sally Field said about acting, and if you have one too many excuses not to, don't do it. I think the same is true for any creative endeavor where you are ultimately alone and no one
Hmm.
can do it for you. Is that breaks a lot of people. And I'm so grateful. I wanted it more than I didn't. So I suffered and suffered. And finally now it's when I enter my studio, it really is church. And where I'm at most, yeah. And I can enter, it's like the womb of creation. But
Absolutely.
it takes a while for that to simply develop.
Yeah.
It just
You know,
takes
it's
time.
strange. It's like we are very social creatures,
Mm,
and yet I think there's a deception in that,
yeah.
because we're also faced with the reality that we are alone. You
And
know,
then we die alone.
we
Yeah.
die alone. We come. I mean, think about if you couldn't communicate. It just
With words, you mean?
with anything, like
Anything.
you had no eyes, so you can never know what another human being looked like. You had
Yeah.
no ears, you could never hear anything. Right? You just imagine being shut off. You don't have the ability to write or speak. Or, I mean, even though you could be surrounded by 10,000 people, you would be absolutely alone.
Oh my God.
And yet, the truth is even though we can hear and talk and smell and all these other things, a lot of us feel that way still, you know? And so
Yeah.
we can play with this idea that we're all connected and, you know. We have family and friends, and we have these beautiful experiences, you know.
True.
But in the end, it's like when you sleep, the eyes go shut, and all of a sudden you're alone again. And and
You're alone. And then that's where, at least circling back when you said you would like to say not to let go of the Judeo-Christian tradition of my heritage. There's that. And I have not. But, and it's certainly what I interrupted because I wanted to say, I think in those moments and as time goes by, it's the cultivation of, and after disappointments with humanity and with
sure,
ourselves, where the cultivation of self with God or spirit starts to become even more important.
absolutely, absolutely. And my mom once said, she said to me, "Be very careful that you don't mistake my faith for my traditions."
Huh.
And to me, most of Christianity is traditions. You know,
Right.
most people who call themselves people of faith don't understand faith. They don't get it. They don't, you know. I mean, we had a big church here in the city shut down, and I'm like, wait a
Really?
second, you know, because of the coronavirus. Well,
Yeah, of
everybody's,
course.
and I'm like, wait. I thought you were people of faith, right? Like, why are you one walking in fear, making decisions like everybody else does? That, you know, if anything, you should be open 24/7 for those who need help. Because one, you should be bold enough and conscious enough of who you are, what you are, and the power in which you are, flowing out of that energy and that love and that peace and that care, so that, and without any fear, you know. And
Mm.
I mean, I'm reading this book called Smith Wigglesworth. It's like 5 inches thick, and this guy was this crazy, beautiful man out of England, and you know, this woman brought him her dead baby, and he took the
Wow.
baby. He says,
Oh.
um, "God's going to tell me to do something very strange here," and he drops the baby and kicks the baby against the wall, and the baby comes back to life. Right?
Holy shit.
Yeah. like like you know, when I was growing up in the church, like I would hear stories about people like this, right, who just were in tuned to the point, like boom, like crazy stuff would happen, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, you can go off on some weird tangent and stuff, but so like the whole animism thing, all that stuff, to me it's like it's just people seeking truth, you know. I deal with this one artist, and she does primarily portraits, but she does some house portraitures as well. And and so I looked at the photos, and the reason why her and I work together is because she has this incredible skill set in drawing and painting, but she struggles with the conceptualization, the spiritualization, if you will, um, you know, capturing the soul of that painting or person. And
Right.
so we work together. I compose it, uh, you know, together, and then she paints it. And so within a second after of seeing the house, I said, "Oh, I know the solution." Right? We're going
Right.
to go in. We got to find pictures of Celtic dancers dancing around a fire. Right?
Oh,
Because the trees out front of this house, I just saw animated dancing around this
wow.
house, and the as you walked up to the door, we're going to use the temperatures. We're going to go from cool to warm. We're going to have certain contrasts, certain verticals, certain way that we're going to lay things out, because you need to be invited, and that's going to be the fire that they're dancing around. And she freaked out. Like I as soon as I saw it, it was only like literally 3 seconds, and boom, we had this idea. And she says, that's weird, because the area in which the house is called like the Irish Isle or something of this place in Jersey, right? So
No
it has
way.
this huge Celtic,
No way.
yeah. So I was like, well, there it is, you know, like,
Oh my God, you channeled that. You
oh,
channeled that.
yeah. And so like this, you know, the stuff you're talking about that you're pushing into, you know,
Mm-hmm.
go deep into it, and you don't need to subtract. You just need to get clarity, you know, as you go into it. And I
That's
always go
nice.
into it with the understanding you, for me personally, because it's going to change for people depending on where they are. But I go into all things understanding that nothing separates me from God through
Mm-hmm.
Christ. And so,
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I can explore anything and everything in all of God's creations without fear. And sometimes I'll go
Oh,
down a path and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to call it evil. I'm not going to call it unclean, but I'm just going to realize it's not for me. And then I move on to something else, right?
right.
And and so because that's just my, like, I don't have that fear,
That's
because
great.
I go into it with this understanding of who I am. But
With your faith.
yeah, and my faith is to reconcile man, creation to God, right? And so that is
Mm,
what the the um the paganist and the animist and a lot of these people are ultimately seeking, and you can go into these different faiths from the Jewish to the Muslim to the Buddhist. Yeah, they're all seeking reconciliation, this relationship, this harmony, this.
that's right. The harmony with the source. And when I learned a bit about, say, missionaries, this is going to be
Hmm.
a little, it made me certainly deeply sad, but was that they would try to sell heaven. But the truth
Mm,
is, the animists believed God was in everything, that there were many
yeah,
gods, and
yeah,
that you couldn't sell them heaven because God lived with them. God was of nature, not in it or above it. So they had to sell hell and sow fear. And that's a problem, and
yep.
separation. And that's something that I struggle with. But I love the idea of union. And I think that is definitely what all people who have a spiritual bent, like a lot of artists do,
Hmm.
share,
Yeah,
is union.
yeah,
And
that's it.
through love.
Through
Yeah.
love. Like my
So,
faith is not rooted in fear. I never understand. I'm not even truly a believer in hell, to be quite honest. I'm like, yeah, that's
right.
something God made for angels who fell, not humans. But just because the Bible
Huh.
says that. But anyways, um,
Interesting.
and the more and more you press into God, it's like it makes no sense, because the truth is, I'm going to be very clear in how I say this. If
Mm.
there's a God who built a hell to kill people and torture them forever, he's an asshole, and I want nothing to do with him. Period. Right. So, because that's a human thing to judge people and hurt people.
Right.
Like, God doesn't play that game. Come on, that's ridiculous.
Too big for that. Yeah.
Exactly,
Right.
and now to reconcile and to love, love the person. Like there's these people. This guy who was in India, and this man goes into his house, rapes and kills his family.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a Christian guy. So now what do you do? So he ultimately loved the man, and now they travel the world together preaching the gospel.
Huh.
Right? You can't have that kind of reconciliation and powerful story without doing. It's easy to hate the man, but to
Yeah.
love somebody, that's not easy at all. To really love someone. Um, but yeah, so I love
Yeah.
your story, your journey, and what you're pushing into. I love the story of Julia the butterfly. Uh, and I'm excited to see what you do with that. With you know, um, you're a very, 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 very powerful artist. Very powerful,
Thank you. Wow.
because you have these ingredients at high levels, and you're
Mm.
bringing it together. And if you want, I'd love to sit down over a Skype call, or you know, um, and discuss with you your ideas of your design and things, if you ever want to do that.
I
Um,
would. That would be really interesting.
yeah,
Thanks.
it would be fun.
That would
Um,
be.
so, quick question.
Yeah.
Um, what's something that you love to eat?
I love, thanks to 5 years in Italia, I've I've in I've only ever panicked when I've run out of olive oil
Oh
in
my
my
God, it's
house.
so true. I went out for the coronavirus and I'm like,
Oh,
what do I need? What? Oh, toilet paper. I got a shower for that. But I do need olive oil. I actually stocked
exactly.
up on olive oil.
Exactly. I actually had a heart clutch. I'm like, oh my God, is that our last bottle? Yeah,
That's hilarious.
that
Wow.
is.
Okay. Oh man. So tell me, like, what is up with this olive oil stuff in this part of the world?
Damn. Damn if I know.
Yeah. Okay.
Seriously.
Just very cool.
If you have
I,
insights.
I bought some Greek olive oil the other day,
Yes.
and I was like, oh, okay, I'll try this. You know, it's kind of cool. It's a cool bottle. Greek, nice. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I'm sorry. I fell in love with it.
Oh yeah. No, you gotta go Greek olive oil, baby. Oh yeah.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, Greek and Italian. Yeah, yeah.
Like when I make my bread,
I
right
saw
before I
pictures
bake
of
it.
your bread. I
Yeah,
was very
right.
impressed.
I now drizzle olive oil on there and put some
Oh,
Italian seasoning on there and bake it, and it kind of like fries the top a little bit, but it soaks in, and
oh my
goodness,
God.
it's
Do you make
so good.
garlic bread?
I
Garlic bread?
have not put any garlic on it, but I did buy some garlic yesterday, so I'm gonna actually try that.
You know what?
Because yeah,
Yeah, no, yeah. I love eating raw, the allium family, but it's just too deadly.
what's allium?
Allium is the garlic onion family,
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Why is it
and
too
when
deadly?
the breath,
Oh,
body odor.
who cares?
I know. Well, I do remember obsessively eating. We would toast the bread,
Mm-hmm.
put raw olive garlic on it, scrape it on the toast, and then put olive oil and salt. There's
Mm.
no more perfect food than that. This is when I lived with um, my teacher.
Oh, I was right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah, you were right. Of course, you were right. But anyway,
I wasn't expecting it to be the teacher, but I was right about
it
that too. Okay, cool.
it was, yeah. And and I was teaching at that point. And finally, one of the students said, "Nicole, you and you know, teacher, other teacher slash boyfriend, you have got to get a grip on your garlic breath because it's killing us." And I very confidently turned to this sweet English woman and I said, you're just gonna have to step up and eat it yourself because there's no way in hell I'm not eating this every night after school. Nothing makes me happier.
Mm,
So I don't have it anymore, but that's certainly my favorite food. Anything with garlic or olive oil.
yeah.
Yeah.
I
But
like I like
yeah.
just cutting up an onion with some garlic, some olive oil, sautéing it, and then just opening up a bag of greens, whatever they are, and
Oh
just
yeah.
and then maybe throw a fish in there or something. But like, it doesn't even have to have the fish, but just like that little vegetarian thing, which I'm so weird. I can't believe I'm saying that. But
No, really? That's the perfect meal. I eat
but
very well,
oh
very
yeah,
healthy. Yes, I like all that, but I wanted to answer your question simply because I love everything. I love that's ideal. Yes. A big old healthy salad
mm-hmm.
with, avocados and onions, and I would keep it all raw though. And then a good source of protein. I'm good to go.
That's cool. Very
Yeah.
cool.
Mm-hmm.
Olive oil. The other day I made some bread and my Turkish friend showed me this. They put a little olive oil, squeeze a little bit of a lemon in there, some salt, pepper, mix it together, and it's a nice little thing, a dipping thing.
Oh
And
yeah,
so
yum.
I made a too much the one night, and so I went away and I didn't clean it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I came back and I grabbed some piece of bread and I saw it was still sitting there, and I dipped it in, and I was like, oh my God. I
Really?
never knew you should decant olive oil like you would do a wine.
Oh. Really?
So then I did it again and I let it sit. Like I literally did it intentionally this time because I think probably most of great cooking was found accidentally. Um,
Right.
yeah. Oh, I'll just make this dough, let it sit. Oh, I have to go do
Right.
something. Oh, whoa, it rose. Look at it, it made bread, right? Um,
Like, oh, fire. Huh.
I actually found the
Oh
best way to
no.
make sweet potatoes. I wrapped them
Ooh,
in tinfoil,
how?
put them in
Yeah.
the oven, and I was like gonna cook it for an hour, right?
Right.
Okay. I fell asleep.
Oh, okay.
Two and a half hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes later, I wake up to the smell of like pure sugar in my house. And so ever since there, I've never had to put butter, sugar, anything on a sweet potato because it's so sweet if you let it bake for 2.5 hours to 3 hours.
Oh my God,
At the
that
two and a
is
half hour,
crazy.
boom, it
At what,
breaks.
250?
250, 300,
Really
yeah,
low?
somewhere yeah, just, like I just keep it
Forever.
at 300, 350, I guess. That's probably what I do at. But it's just, once it hits that
Wow.
230, 2 hours, 30 minutes in, it just, and it breaks and it fills your house with like this sweetness. And the sweet
Oh,
potato itself is sweet.
yeah. Oh, that's so great. I love that.
Yeah, it's
I
cool.
love, I'm just so grateful. I'll chop it up and I'll steam them for 15 minutes.
But then
Done.
it's like, it's like a little bittery still like that, right? It's not that
I
sweet.
love bitter.
Okay.
I don't need it to be sweet. It's sweet.
That's cool. That makes sense.
I do. I love bitter. And then I'll put more bitter stuff on it. Astringent bitter. No, olive oil, salt, pepper, all manner of, you know, herbs or
Wow.
turmeric and seasoning or parsley, dry parsley, all of those
Hmm.
antioxidants. I know.
I was never a big fan of parsley. Um,
Oh,
I always like cilantro. That's my, I guess, my
oh, I
Puerto
love
Rican roots.
cilantro. Oh yeah. Oh, really? Oh yes, of course.
Of course.
Well done.
But I have to say, I don't know what I was cooking. I was cooking something that required parsley in it, and I was like, whoa, this actually works pretty nice. And so now I'm a little bit of a fan of parsley.
Good.
But before I used to be like, heck no, that's fake. That's like the stuff they put on the side to garnish like a
Oh,
dish.
I
It's like
know.
stuff you're supposed to throw away. And
That's true for the cheap food. I know, but
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
It's so healthy. It's more healthy than spinach. And dried
Really?
parsley is probably, yeah, the healthiest spice in your drawer.
Wow.
Tremendous amount of, yeah, of
Okay.
minerals and vitamins in it. I don't know about minerals, but
I love spinach. Oh my God, I love spinach.
me too. I
Just
love arugula. That's really bitter. I love it.
man, we sound like cows. Ooh,
I'm a cow. I'm a ruminant.
I'm ruminant. Ah, beautiful. So, Ms. Nicole, how can
Yes,
people get in contact with you?
my email,
Okay, which is
which is Nicole at NicoleAlger.com.
okay, and then I'll add that into the show notes so that people have access to that, and then your
Okay.
website as well.
Yep, NicoleAlger.com. Wait, yeah,
Okay.
that's right. And
And
Instagram is Nicole Alger, which a little plug for since so many shows don't allow you to post work, finish work. I put other things in it. And one thing I've been doing the past few years is painting, which I mentioned to you, foster kids or adoptive kids.
oh yeah, that's right.
And so I will post those. Um, but you can certainly go to Instagram, which is Nicole Alger. I, I, easy enough.
Yeah, I
One
totally
word.
forgot to ask you about that. I knew there was something. I'm like, what am I
Yeah.
missing? And then I remembered it through the conversation, but then by the end I forgot. Um, but do share a little bit about that. Like, what's going on with that? Why do you do it, and what do you do?
Well, that was simple, actually, pretty simple. I was really looking for a way to use. I think I was going through a period of wondering what's it all about again. I go
Hmm.
through those. And in these times in which we live, it can seem selfish to be in the arts, even though we need
Hmm.
it to live and breathe. But I really felt that way, and I really wanted to somehow contribute more, especially in this environment too, where it is such a business and there's a lot of work out there that I don't have a lot of respect for.
Hmm.
And that's just makes me sad. I don't think that'll ever really change.
Nope.
So I think I was in a dip, feeling that more acutely. And this opportunity came. This woman who's another member of PSOA, which a lot of people are, she started this organization. She had the same impulse and hooks up with adoption agencies and paints primarily adoptive foster kids. And they show these gives them to these adoption foster agencies, and they kind of put them in their offices. And they're apparently, you know this because you said you were a foster child. I read that about you, right? So, and that very often it can, seeing these images, these portraits of people, can entice people, apparently, potentially push the needle. And then if a child is fostered or adopted, they of course get the portrait, which is a lovely thing, detail. But that seemed to me a wonderful way to be of service using
Yeah.
this skill. So I do that. And I've only painted 3 children of people who've been deployed. So they also paint servicemen and women's families,
Mm.
family members. So I did a brother and a sister recently for a deployed man. And that's why I do it, just to be of service in that regard.
That's beautiful.
And that's it. Yeah.
Wow.
Not more complicated. I know. And, right. And
And
that's
what
it.
were you gonna say?
I don't think I was, I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
Came and went.
I love that idea. I love that service. Hmm.
Mm.
The I kind of wonder, like, if my concern being that I, spent, I don't know, 15 years in foster care, um, because you're moved around so often and you're, either back to your homes or different families. One of the issues with foster kids is they don't know really how to hold on to things.
Mm.
And so I kind of wonder, like, if it would be maybe wiser for the organization to hold on to those originals until maybe they were like, the kids were maybe like 30,
Really?
and then give them a print, like a framed print, because they don't know the difference if it's a real work of art or not, right? But they have their image, which they'll adore and love, and you can hang those. But
Huh.
you basically create kind of like a vault for them so that they have something when they are a little older, more mature. They might have a family, a home at that time, and then they have this gift, right? That is, they can keep, because a lot of foster kids, they live in a black garbage bag. I remember a couple of years ago, I was moving from one apartment to another,
Mm-hmm.
and I just consciously made the decision I am not going to put anything I own in a black garbage bag.
Hmm.
And I ended up throwing out, because it was after my separation, and so it was maybe about a year afterwards, and I just looked around like, dude, like everything I own is from us, right?
Right.
So I threw out everything, all my dishes, sheets, I mean, even my bed, like just everything, and and decided that I was gonna re-buy everything new,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 so I went out and bought some totes and things and put, my art supplies, my computer stuff, and my clothes for the most part, and and a couple other little belongings, but I just consciously, like, I'm not putting anything in a black bag, and I never have ever since. And
Huh.
because yeah, when you see the black bag, it kind of it's like, eh. Now my brother, on the other hand, for some weird reason, he's like 41, and
Mm-hmm.
he still has toys and coloring books from when he was a child. I don't know how in the world he's kept it all, but like he's
Huh.
now has them like framed in his house, like, um, and but he's the only person I've ever known who's done that, and yeah, my sister, she's almost 40, and she said to me the other day, this is the first time in my life where I have more than a trailer's worth of stuff, right? And
Mm.
her, every home she lived in, she has 3 kids, and she just was like, I only own enough. Like, she never really invested in settling,
Mm.
um, because she just always, as a foster kid, you're always nomadic, right? So you're always prepared to come home one day and then you have no home, right? And so you're just always constantly prepared to shift, to move. And so that's why I'm just saying, like, it might be interesting to create some type of vault that you guys would keep those original paintings and artwork in,
Mm.
just so they don't
That's
get lost.
valuable insight.
Yeah.
Did you live with any with your siblings during those years?
Yeah, for when I was younger, I lived with 2 brothers and a sister, and then my sister went back with my family, my parents, and brother, my older brother, was then always treated as the black sheep, and so
Mm.
he'd always get in trouble, and they would try to separate him from us, and that was tough when we were kids. Um, and then my younger brother and I moved. We basically they in the end they always try to keep us 2 together, and so our bond is the strongest.
Right.
Um, and then um, you know, so
But you mentioned
at
your
one point
mom.
we were separated. Hmm.
Was that when you mentioned about don't confuse my faith with my religion?
That was my foster mom,
Ah.
one of them,
Mm.
who when I aged out, I had to
Mm-hmm.
still finish high school, um, and, and so they permitted me to come back to live with them,
Mm-hmm.
and so I could finish high school. And it's been 20 some years now, and
Mm-hmm. Wow.
you know, and so they're my mom and my dad, and
Mm.
yeah,
Thanks
it's
for sharing that and your insight also about the paintings.
yeah, cool, awesome.
Well, wow, you know, you've done well, and you don't sound bitter, and that's probably even more important.
No, it's interesting. I'll tell you the reason why I'm not.
Mm.
Um, it all comes back to love,
Mm-hmm.
and I think one of the hard things about being human is that we're trained to be polite,
Mm-hmm.
and being polite, the root word in it is politics, right? Which is
Wow.
basically
Do they share a root? I love
poly, something
etymology.
poly, right? I would assume so. I mean, look at
Not
those words.
necessarily, because it could
Not
be,
necessarily, but
but that's really interesting. I'm going to look that
you
up when I
think
get
about
home.
it. I'll go look it up.
Wow. No, you're right. When you think about it, absolutely.
And
Oh, on the nose. Wow.
so I find being polite is just a very civil way of lying. And I, at some level, despise polite people
Mm-hmm.
because I don't feel that they're honest. And so my brother was very, very violent, and he would always blow up and scream and la la la. And I didn't like it, but I loved it because you always knew where he was standing.
Yeah.
And then my my foster family were very, very intelligent, well trained psychologists kind of folk, but you're like, why are you so nice? Like, a normal person would want to beat the hell out of me. Like, and I remember my dad said, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. And I'm like, come on, man, I know you angry, right? You got
Yeah.
to be angry or I'm not doing my job as a kid. And so,
That's funny.
I got this great respect for their ability, but at the end of the day, I think they're very polite people, right? Um, and what I found in life is like, if you don't know how to grieve honestly, then you actually never deal with things honestly. And so when it came to my biological mother, um, I've talked about this in other podcasts. She murdered my father. I was drug baby, left in the hospital, like all kinds of horrible things. She was not a great mom. And yet through it, I had this incredible spiritual experience at 15, which gave me this ability to dream in color and control my dreams, which
Huh.
led me through this experience, which when I woke up from it, gave me 3 days of unbridled hatred for her.
Huh.
At the end of that 3 days, I then was just flooded with pity and then love and forgiveness. And it's happened several times in my life where I've been very, very hurt, came through that experience, same experience, and come out with this incredible love for the person. And so when my mom died, she said,
Hmm.
I was about 18 at the time. She said, my, you're the only, you're my only child who ever loved me.
Hmm.
And sadly, like, I didn't know if to believe that or not, but to this day, it's absolutely clear. Like my brothers and sisters, they all hate her. And except for one brother who he's the opposite. He loves her so much that he's in love with this fantasy figure that never existed.
Hmm.
And but when um I remember the last day I ever saw my mom, and
Hmm.
was with the foster parents, and I was 18. We went out. She dropped me off. I was sitting at the kitchen table, and my foster mom was there. Now, for years, while my mom was in prison and all kinds of stuff, my mom hated the foster parents that I had. She despised them. She was so jealous of them. She would scream in court that she was going to kill them, all this kind of stuff. And so when she came that day, um, she looked at my mom and said, "Thank you. You've done a great job with my boys."
Ugh.
And
Wow.
uh, and so this is like foundational to my faith, which is reconciliation. You know, acknowledging that we're in partnership with each other.
Hmm.
And yeah, dang it,
Thanks.
got me crying on this thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. What a gift that she said that.
Yeah, I have my children, and they live with my ex, and now they live in a different country,
Oh,
and they have a great stepfather, you know, and so
yeah.
I wanted to be proactive and use my mom's words to him,
Oh,
just said, doctor, you're doing a great job with my kids, so thank you, and
wow.
just to get to pass that on,
That's very generous of you. It's a really generous gift. Your kids have permission to love him.
Oh, absolutely. And we've had conversations about that.
Mm.
Like you're free to to love. I actually had a conversation with them that they're free not to love too.
Wow.
I said, do not love me just because I'm your father.
Huh.
I want you to love me because you love me. And that was a very weird, strong conversation to have. My kids were very young, maybe 6 and 9.
Yeah.
Um, and that really hurt my daughter for a week or two.
Right.
But I just was like, you know what? I don't want them to feel that they have to love me, right? I should be I should live a life that earns that, you know,
It's
which
big of you.
puts a responsibility on me, but
Mm-hmm.
also puts a responsibility on them to be loved, like I'm gonna love them unconditionally. It's like this one guy, I think it was Jordan Peterson, said, you're gonna
Mm.
love your kids, but the goal is to have kids that you actually like. In the end, like, and so I work.
That actually, that you can't create. I think chemistry is natural. We love our kids, but we don't always like them or even click. I have
Yeah,
real respect for that now, but you have to You're right. You have to develop the friendship. If you don't have a natural affinity, you do. That's right.
Yeah.
If that's what he
It requires
means,
a lot
I
of work.
agree.
It requires a lot of work. It was easy for
Yeah.
my daughter and I because we're very similar, but my son and I are very, very different. I can
Right.
go sit in a corner for 18 hours like my daughter and be totally at peace alone. He would
Right.
be bouncing off the walls, 3 steps walking towards the corner, like and
Right.
and and so and so it's taken a while to figure out his language, his cadence, what's important to him. And then once you do, now him and I have this, we've always had an incredible relationship, but now it's to me the best relationship. Um, and because now we're going through this discipline thing, and so every morning he's like, "I'm a beautiful, disciplined man," and we're working daily, So I have set on my phone. I got to call him at this specific time,
Yeah.
um, and so it's very, very cool. But
Wow, they're lucky to have you, that you're committed like that to figuring out his language and his cadence. They're lucky to have you.
with confidence, like you said to the lady with the garlic bread, they are very conscious of it. They are.
Nice.
Miss Nicole, thank you so
Mr.
much.
Dunn, thank you. What a pleasure.
It really, really was.
In just 30 days, the Core 80 experience teaches you to decode the intentional design underneath great masterpieces. Through video lessons, assignments, and feedback, you learn to recognize the underlying structures like thrust maps, echoes, and gamuts that give master compositions substance and gravitas. Knowing how master artists and illustrators compose their artwork unlocks your ability to give your artwork more meaning and energy. Enroll today and get a 7-day no-hassle money-back guarantee at core80.com.